Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, as we welcome you to the second half of tonight's edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. And now, while the entire world has been focused on what is playing out in Iran and the stalled ceasefire talks between the United States of America and Iran, one must not forget other red flags at this point in time that are being waved. And one of them has been Cuba. Now, we've seen in the past where a decade ago where Barack Obama, had stepped foot on a Cuban soil, and this was the first time a U.S. leader had actually touched the ground. But right now, we're seeing Trump's crippling embargo playing out in Cuba, and we've seen the interference and also threats that have come through from Donald Trump. We know what has taken place with Venezuela, then the attacks on Iran, and is Cuba on the cards as well. And also at the same time, energy supplies. There are just huge critical problems that are emerging out of the U.S. In terms of what it is aiming to do in Cuba, and it is drastically affecting more areas, the health sector in particular, that has been affected as well. And this is the reason why we have assembled our panel tonight once again. And I must say it's been an absolute pleasure, but it's been quite hectic assembling this panel today. And someone that has worked very, very hard in getting this panel together for us this evening has been Yusuf Kadwa, who is a BDS activist. We're also going to be joined by Clever Banganayi, who is the Deputy General Secretary of Friends of Cuba Society Focus. He's an engineer that was trained in Cuba in the early 90s. And hopefully we will be able to be joined by a medical student who is studying out in Cuba as well. So as we await my guests on screen, Yusuf Kadwa and Clever Banganayi, on screen. I see Yusuf is coming on right now. Yusuf, salamu alaikum and welcome.
Jazakallah for having us.
Shukran for your time as well. And Clever to you as well. We do appreciate you coming on at such short notice.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having us as Friends of Cuba Society on your channel.
Yes, Clever, I'd actually like to begin with you. And obviously, you directly, just looking at your designation, Friends of Cuba Society, you've got a very long association with Cuba. And I see Adolf Ramayla has joined us as well. Adolf, welcome to the show. I think Adolf, there could possibly be a problem. Clever, let's just go. And obviously, you have been monitoring what is taking place. We've seen the threats coming through from Donald Trump, and I'm sure you are not happy with what you are seeing as far as Cuba is concerned, the threats as well. And we've heard Donald Trump make the statement saying, after Iran, we're coming after you in Cuba.
Yes, thank you very much for having us on your channel. First of all, as Friends of Cuba Society, would want to condemn the executive orders that were issued by President Trump on the 29th of January, where he declared oil embargo on Cuba, which means that he's not allowing any country to send fuel to Cuba, also not allowing Cuba to trade or to buy any fuel from any other country in the world, which we see for us as a mere terrorist attack and genocidal act of the President of the United States and the government of the United States. We know that also on the 12th of February, 2026, the United Nations Commission on Human Rights condemned this sort of act, this barbaric act by the United States, by saying the U.S. executive orders imposing a fuel blockade on Cuba is a serious violation of international law and a grave threat to democratic and equitable international trade for many other countries. They went on to say as well that it is an extreme form of unilateral economic coercive with extraterritorial effects through which the United States seeks to exert coercive on the sovereignty of Cuba and compel other sovereign states to alter their lawful commercial relations with Cuba. So we see that this is really not something that is can be condoned by any other nations or by any other people in such a way that the blockade that is now being imposed on Cuba, it means that Cuba would not be able to generate any electricity. As you know, Cuba is an island. They don't produce coal like we do, and therefore all their power comes from oil. So they have to buy diesel to power those generators so that they can send electricity to everywhere. And therefore, this is quite a crippling impact on. This has got a crippling impact on the Cuban economy and the Cuban life.
Well, certainly clever, and I think thank you for obviously providing context to the discussion that we're having. But Yusuf, just to bring you into the discussion, and it is clear from what Clever is saying that the situation is dire, the situation is critical at this point in time, and on a global stage, I personally don't think that Cuba is getting the necessary attention it deserves, considering that there is a huge crisis already existing. And I wouldn't say not in the making. That crisis is there as we speak right now, Yusuf.
That's correct. The fear right now, having spoken to a senior Washington journalist who's on the Cuba desk, is that Iran has kicked Trump and his base in the teeth, and now they're looking for an easy win for an election. And Cuba is supposed to be an easy win. The fear is they're going to use the Gaza model. Let's starve them. Let's destroy their healthcare system. Let's destroy the education system, and then send the infiltrators. We had all the anti-Castro, anti-Cuba dissidents in Florida, and they've already tried to enter into Cuba. Luckily, the Cuban Navy was able to keep them out, but they will be inundated at some point. And that's the playbook that they will want to use to take over Cuba. It's been on their radar for many years. Everybody knows how America has tried to assassinate Castro, what have you. And we know that if that happens, we're hoping that the friends of Cuba, people like Russia and China and Mexico and Brazil and what have you, will stand up. But we also need to remember that China, as an example, needs oil from Iran. So they have an ulterior motive to stand up. If things turn sour, will people stand up for Cuba? And as South Africans, we need to remember our history. During our struggles in apartheid, it was Cuba that sent their troops to Angola to support us. And since 94, they have been the backbone of helping keeping our rural healthcare community going by exporting doctors to us. There's no other country in the world whose biggest export is medical care. You know, it's a unique phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is, in fact, and we can obviously vouch for that. But also, what you're saying, Yusuf, is there is a pattern that is emerging, and like in the case of Gaza as well. And I recall early on when the genocide had actually started in November, it started in October, but November 2023, the healthcare services were immediately under pressure and they were being bombed and wiped out as well. So we see a pattern that is definitely emerging in Cuba as well. I see Adolf is with us right now, and because of the bandwidth, I suppose video may be a problem. He's gone off again. But I think, Clever, knowing the Cuban people well, and obviously you've had a lot of interaction, you've studied out there in Cuba as well, just if you could provide us or paint a picture on how this is impacting on ordinary Cubans at this point in time.
No, as you're saying, I also echoing what Yusuf is saying, that the Americans have been on Cuba's case for more than 65 years now. Since Cuba got its independence in 1959, in 1961, we saw them sending some mercenary which we just celebrated now a few days ago, the Battle of Playa Iron, which is now known as Bay of Pigs, where the Americans sent their first mercenary to go and try and overthrow the Cuban government, and they were defeated then. And since then, they then put on a number of and series of sanctions or blockade, economic blockade on Cuba, trying in all means to try and stifle their economy and stifle the livelihood of the people. But during the Cold War, we know that during that time when Soviet Union was still there and the Eastern Bloc of socialist republics was still intact, it was much easier for Cuba to do trade with those countries. But when it came to at the late 80s, early 90s, when the Soviet Union disintegrated and this Eastern Bloc also disintegrated, Cuba lost about more than 80% of its trade. And then they went into a same situation like they're having now, which they called special period. That's the time that we arrived in Cuba in 1991. And we're a group of us from Africa, quite a number. I think in the Island of Youth, where we started, we're more than 13,000 young African people who were being trained by Cubans. And one thing that they told us, that they were not going to take us back to our countries because of the economic problems that they had. We were going to be trained and they were going to adjust to the economic situation that was there in Cuba until we finish our degrees. And most of us finished and we came back into different African countries, which include Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Ethiopia, and many other countries in Africa where they trained young Africans, and these Africans are now giving back to their countries. The impact of the blockade currently now is affecting the Cubans so badly, because now it affects the transport of goods, the public transport, the buses, the taxis can't get fuel. So there's a lot of rationing to try and make sure that the Cuban can provide that health and education to their people. So it's affecting the production of electricity. That means they've got more than 18 hours of blackouts, which we used to have here, different stages. So they are also going through the same stages of electrical blackouts. That means that their hospitals, their schools, their old age homes can't function properly. And you can see this is, like you said, you are trying to stifle the livelihood of people. They are trying to make sure that the Cubans suffer, and then the people can go into the street and protest against their government because of this economic hardship that they're having.
Well, certainly, in fact, I think, this seems to be the modus operandi, Clever, of the United States of America, is to create chaos in the country and hope that there is going to be regime change. They tried exactly the same in Iran as well. In the case of Venezuela, Maduro was actually kidnapped and taken away as well. So these are the excuses that they use. They use regime change as an excuse to take over a country. But Yusuf, just coming back, and I see Adolf has actually sent us, and what Clever is saying, he's saying my network is very bad due to electricity cuts here. So, unfortunately, he can't join us. So this is the problem that they are faced with. But just coming to your involvement, Yusuf, now, I think, when you sent me the message this morning, and you asked me the question, have you guys done any programs on the Cuban situation? Sadly, even our mainstream media is not touching on the subject and have got to grips or come to terms with the dire situation that Cubans find themselves in. We spoke about the strong relationship that Fidel Castro and Cuba has had with South Africa. There's been cooperation that is going back for decades at this point in time. But what you also mentioned is, you are working with people. You are working with the plan is to work with the Brazilian, with the Cuban ambassadors as well. There are a few individuals, there are a few doctors, that obviously have expressed concern as well. You spoke about, I think, there's a Dr. Norman Maharaj if I'm not
Correct.
talking about if I'm correct. I think Brian Williams, I know he's busy at this point in time behind the scenes talking. So there are individuals in this country that have expressed grave concerns and are trying to do something about the situation.
Correct. Yes. I think the thing that people need to understand is the debt that South Africa owes to Cuba is a life debt. They provided troops to fight in Angola against our anti-apartheid government, right? And I think across the liberation struggles through Africa that Cuba supported, they must have lost. Can't remember the exact figure, but it's probably at least 50 to 60,000 Cubans that died fighting for us. It's our duty to stand up for them. It's as simple as that, you know. And Cuban government sent us a list of desperately needed medications. When we priced that medication in South Africa, the cost was so prohibitive. It was probably coming close to over R500,000. Luckily, because the Brazilian government has a huge generic pharmaceutical industry, we managed to get the Cuban ambassador to speak to the Brazilian ambassador, who has now donated those pharmaceuticals. We do know as well, from the time we received that list to now, they're already being depleted. And so I've asked people like Adolf, who's the medical student, to reach out to all the hospitals and do another stock take and tell us what else do we need, because we know that Mexico and Panama also have a very large generic pharmaceutical industry. The problem also happens is, how do we get it from Brazil and other countries to Cuba, because the siege has started. Transportation on the normal courier system is very difficult at the moment, because internationally the petrol price hikes have thrown standard transport courier out of the roof, number one. And then there are also certain courier companies that are based in the US. And we know that people have tried to send it via them. But when the goods get to the warehouses in the US is not releasing it to send it to Cuba. So for instance, our South African medical students normally receive care packages every 2 and 3 months. So at the moment, the female students, our medical students in Cuba, are saying, please send us sanitary pads, send us tampons. We're not getting any of these. So it's our duty as well to stand up for our own South Africans who will come back and work in our hospitals. Right? So we need to stand up for them. Simple as that.
Yes, Yusuf. I see Adolf has actually joined us as well. I'm hoping, Adolf can hear us. Adolf, good evening to you and welcome. If you could unmute your mic, please, Adolf. Well, Adolf certainly seems to be having a problem. Unfortunately, and we can understand because, Clever, it would be quite interesting to understand from the South African students that are studying out in Cuba. And at this point in time, I think, with Yusuf mentioning networking with the students and also looking at Mexico, looking at some of the other countries in terms of, combining the efforts. But just looking at it from the Friends of Cuba Society as well, in terms of what you are able to do, Clever.
So thank you very much. I think what actually happened at the beginning when Professor Brian Williams came to us with the idea of this Cuba Solidarity Now network, which is now a very big group of WhatsApp group that has been formed, that all of us, a lot of people have joined. I think it's got about more than 700 people in the group. Most of them are veterans that were outside the country. Some have been in the struggle for the independence of South Africa, and some have been ministers and so on. So quite a number of people are in this group, including our comrade Ronnie Casril, who is quite active in the group. So what we suggested is that we form a special purpose vehicle where we can open up a bank account, which is now spread to most people. And this bank account is the one that now we are using as a vehicle to ask people to come and donate money, deposit money into this account. And then this is the money that I think Yusuf is talking about, that we're now using the same of these resources to try and buy medications, try and buy some few things like solar panels and so on, so that we can send to Cuba and then make an impact and try and reduce this impact of the blockade that has been put on Cuba. So on our side, mostly we are mobilizing people to join this group. We will do other activities as Friends of Cuba Society that we usually do all the years. That is sending messages of solidarity and protesting at the American embassies throughout the country and the consulate. We'll all continue doing that. Also coordinating our work with the different trade unions that are friendly to Cuba. For example, all the unions that are in COSATU, that are doing quite a lot of work with that, and many other progressive organizations, people in the coordinating also with people in the solidarity with Palestine. Now also a lot of people in solidarity with Iran and many other countries, solidarity with Venezuela, that are coming together to try and fight this imperialist action of the United States and Israel. As you have said, the failures of the United States government and its CIA and its all this terrorist military in Iran has made them to try and find a scapegoat, and the next target will be Cuba. As Yusuf has also said, this is not the first time that the Cubans have come to Africa have been coming to Africa to help. And since 1976, when the South African Defense Force invaded Angola, the Cubans were there and defended Angolans people. And after that, they came back again in the mid-80s, and the Cubans sent quite a number of its soldiers who volunteered to come and fight. And this is when the impact of that war in the Battle of Cuito Canavale, when the South African Defense Force was defeated, and then it led into the independence of Namibia and the release of Comrade Nelson Mandela from prison. And that's the new dispensation that came into South Africa. So us as South Africans, as Africans, we owe quite a lot to Cuba. It is the right time that we mobilize our government, mobilize all the people that love peace to contribute into this account that we have, so that we can have this necessary special medication that is needed by Cuba because of the blockade that has been imposed on them. Cuba cannot be able to buy anything from any country that cannot be confiscated by the United States.
Well, certainly clever. And also, I think, Yusuf, what is also important to understand is Clever speaks about the Cuba Solidarity Now campaign. And I'm sure that the Cuban ambassador very, very actively involved from the communication that you sent me, where the ambassadors identified some of the projects and what is a priority at this point in time in terms of what will immediately benefit the people of Cuba. Now, if I recall when the Russian invasion of Ukraine had taken place, we had the entire Europe and the Western world rallying behind Ukraine, taking in their refugees, support that was going through to the Ukraine as well. And it's now time where Cuba has actually played its part in the past. Clever spoke about Africa. Africa owes a huge debt to Cuba as well. And it is time for the global South to actually stand up to assist Cuba in their time of need. I recall talking to the Ukrainian ambassador when Russia had attacked Ukraine. And at that point in time, even from within South Africa, we had relief organizations that rallied behind to even provide assistance to Ukraine at this point in time. And the question is, why can it not be done? I mean, it's a good thing. The unions are involved, the likes of COSATU are involved, but also in terms of government involvement and also our relief organizations within South Africa who need to come forward and step up.
Definitely, most definitely. I encourage people, go onto YouTube, Mandela Castro. Just listen to what Mandela said. The debt that we owe them, number one, And you are right. The problem that Cuba has is they export doctors and they're not exporting oil and diamonds. So for many countries in the world, they'll just shun them. Whereas they have done more for third world countries than probably any first world country has done. They've been the backbone of healthcare in so many countries. And we owe them a debt that is so huge. And it's our turn to stand up. It's as simple as that.
Yes,
one of the other areas they asked us to help out as well is besides the pharmaceuticals, they need solar panels. Because remember when we had load shedding, right? At our hospitals, we had generators, but we were able to add petrol and diesel to run them. They don't have that. So we're trying to help them to transition those points to solar panels so that they'll be able to power their ICUs, their ventilators, their oxygen machines. If they don't have those things, people have died when the blackout first hit. We can't allow that. That needs to stop. So we need people to actively, yes, Palestine is a very important freedom struggle, but Cuba is as well. So we need people to donate money so we can, the solar panels are crucial. So getting funding in for that is very important as well.
Certainly. I see Adolf is on the phone line. Adolf, good evening to you and welcome. Adolf, can you hear us? Adolf Ramayla? No. I think, yeah.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Adolf. Yes, welcome and thank you for joining us. I know you are on the phone line and we do understand why, because of the network issues out in Cuba. If you could just paint a picture and tell us, on the ground as someone who is studying out there, the medical students in Cuba as well, if you could just provide us and paint a picture of what is the situation on the ground.
No, okay, sir. As you may all know, the situation is dire. Following the capture of the president of Venezuela, because Cuba depended on Venezuela for oil and many other things. So now there's major electricity cuts. Some homes go the whole 24 hours without electricity. They can't even buy meat to put in their fridges because they don't have electricity. Some homes get electricity for like 2-3 hours. Some hospitals also, they experience major cuts. I think there were tens of thousands or thousands of patients that died in some hospitals because they did not have power. So their ventilators went down, and as a result of that, many people died. And now there's also an increase in the prices of your petrol and gas. So even in the school that I studied in, they normally cook for us, but they no longer have the gas because they use gas stoves. So they depend on other small hospitals or clinics to prepare meals for us. So they in the schools, because they don't have power enough, they told all the Cubans to go back to their homes. So it's only as the foreigners in the school who are allowed to attend at the hospitals. But they since they are trying to save electricity, they send others to the Cuban students have went home so they do a long distance study.
Yes, Adolf, thank you for that. Clearly, Clever, we can see that this crisis is already there. From what Adolf has actually described as well, people already starting to die as a result of the lack of treatment, and obviously directly resulting as a result of not allowing the diesel and fuel to come into Cuba to power whatever they have at this point in time. And before we know what's happening is we're looking at another Gaza in the making as well. Because if today it's a healthcare, tomorrow it's going to be poverty, it's going to be hunger, it's going to be food shortages as well. So, all of this tells us that the signs are very, very ominous right now, Clever, if something is not being done urgently.
I think you can see it's not really different from Gaza, in that in Gaza they actually used bombs and guns to actually kill people, as we see on television. But with this one, you can see it's a silent genocide that is being committed by the United States. If you are starving people, if you are making sure that people who are in hospitals, machines don't work, there's no electricity, the ICUs are not working, there's no medication for people, critical surgeries cannot be taken because there's no power and there's also no anesthetic for those people to do that. It's a genocide that you are killing. You are committing to people. It's a silent genocide that is saying that we want to exterminate these people by starving them to death, by also making sure that they don't have any medication in their hospital. When they are sick, they must be sick and die. They cannot go to school. They cannot train their engineers. They cannot continue to train their doctors. As you can see now, he's only saying it's only us, the international students, that are being allowed to come to hospitals, because this is what Cuba does. It will rather sacrifice its own people so that they can save the international world. So the international students can be allowed to go to hospitals, but now they've asked their students to a little bit take a break while they are fixing up the situation. It's also, like you said now, with the capture of Venezuelan President Comrade Nicolas Maduro, Cuba got most of its oil, almost like they're saying 80% of its oil came from Venezuela. But because now the Americans are controlling whatever fuel is moving out of Venezuela, they cannot allow that oil to be sent, or any diesel to be sent to Cuba. So they're making sure that the Cubans can starve to death, and it is now really the international world that needs to come up. We need also to be able to report the United States to the ICC for the crime against humanity, because this is a really crime against humanity. If you are wanting to starve the people, you are saying there is no fuel that can come in. You can't sell even a Panado to Cuba, because Panado contains more than 10% of US technology or US patents. You cannot sell anything. Imagine all the equipment that are used in hospitals. There's nothing that you can actually pick up today that doesn't come from the United States, especially in the medical fraternity. We know the pharmaceutical world is controlled by the United States. All the medication that is supplied in the world outside China is controlled by the United States. Everything, even here, all the patents that we have for any medication, for blood pressure, for diabetes, for anything, it comes with a little bit of some patents from the United States. And therefore, if you are not allowing anything that has got more than 10% to be sold to Cuba, then Cuba doesn't have any capacity of buying anything except to develop their own. But they can't develop their own if you are now killing their industry by not allowing them to generate electricity, to buy parts for equipment for the power stations, to buy parts for their trucks, for their buses, and all these things. It is actually a silent genocide that is being committed by the United States.
Well, certainly clever. And also, I think, Yusuf, we've seen this just this week, where we've seen both President Ramaphosa, and also we've seen the Brazilian president as well, hit out very, very strongly against the United States of America in terms of undermining sovereign nations. And again, this is tantamount to Washington and the United States of America, blackmailing, threatening countries with export of oil. And we see this economic coercion that is taking place. And this is all unjustified, where you are now punishing an entire Cuban population. So again, another form of global blackmail against sovereign states. And both President Ramaphosa and the President of Brazil as well, justified in their harsh tones and the language that was actually used against Donald Trump and the US administration.
Yeah, I think, a couple of family of doctors, and doctors always have to make life and death decisions. But having chatted to a Cuban doctor who was there when the blackouts happened, he said, I have to decide who was going to get electricity with ventilated to survive and who didn't. These are decisions that no human being should have to make, but they had to. They said that I had to decide whether the electricity was going to go to the ICU, was going to go to the general ward where the person had the oxygen pump. How do you make those decisions? It's ridiculous. So we have to support them in every way possible. And yes, there is donor fatigue right now because people have outlaid money for Palestine, number one. And now that the petrol price has gone through the roof, every person in South Africa, they're feeling it in their pocket, whether you're wealthy or not wealthy. When you get to the petrol pump, you got to pay extra. But please, keep a little bit aside and please donate to this cause. We need all the help we can get. We really do.
Yes, well, certainly. And also, I think, clever, just looking at it from the American perspective and the United States in particular, everybody talks about Donald Trump as a transactional president because he'll look at what is in the interest and how America can benefit. And we've even heard where he's gone to the extent where allowing someone like Elon Musk and his Starlink internet terminals into the country, providing compensation, and how America can actually benefit from the misery of Cuba as well. And at the same time, we know that there were many assets of Cuba that were confiscated even in 1959 by the United States of America. And, here we draw parallels where Iran is telling America as part of the negotiations at this point in time that, listen, you need to pay us reparations. You need to pay us compensation as well for the years of sanctions that you imposed upon us. But now it looks like America, the assets, that were confiscated by America wants those assets back at the time when the Cuban Revolution had taken place.
Yes, definitely. It's funny that that the United States comes to say that it's very important for you to actually get the context of what would have happened there. There is quite a lot when the Cubans were towards getting their independence in 1959, 1958. Most of the oligarchies in Cuba were owning large amounts of land. All companies that were in Cuba by that time were all U.S.-owned companies. They owned vast amount of land, and Cubans owned nothing. And then at the end of at the beginning of the revolution in 1959, the Cubans went into a process of trying to do like we did in South Africa, redistribution of the properties of the country, so that everyone can share on the land and all these things. And in that process, in that time, a lot of these people withdrew, illegally stole money from the banks, from the National Bank of Cuba, and they fled to Miami. And some of them have been the ones that have been perpetrating, or that they've been making sure that the United States foreign policy on Cuba is constantly harsh and make sure that the Cuban blockade can never be removed. And I can give you examples of these people who have got parents or have got families that were in Cuba around those times. One of them is their secretary for foreign affairs, which is Marco Rubio, whose parents left Cuba before the triumph of the revolution, and they fled. In fact, they were running away from the dictatorship of Batista. And they ran away around 1952, and they went to the States. And they took quite a lot of money that they went and started businesses. And these are the people who are bribing all the senators and congressmen in the US to maintain this blockade on Cuba. And the other one is Ted Cruz, who is a senator from Texas. He's also got his family also left Cuba with a lot of money that they stole from Cuba. So when Cuba started to nationalize things like the National Electricity Company, the fruit companies, and many of these things, so that the Cubans can have employment, can also be able to distribute, they can take these proceeds of these companies and invest in health and education for free for all the Cubans, invest in housing, so that all the Cubans can have housing, they can have electricity, they can have education for free. The Americans were never happy about that, because it gives a very bad example to the Americans that are suffering quietly with very high cost of living. They can't go to university. They've got so much big debt after graduating from colleges. They can't even pay that debt. There's quite a lot of Americans that work 4 to 5 jobs to maintain their lifestyle. And they can see that if they don't put sanctions on Cuba, Cuba will now come up as a flourishing society, which is an alternative to the capitalist system that the Americans are living.
Yes, clearly, and I think obviously the fact, Yusuf, that Cuba is able to export, top quality medical specialists and doctors, right across the entire world, actually speaks volumes on
Exactly.
the on Cuba as a nation and the
Yes.
capacity for them to actually produce. But I think coming back to what we really need to do right now, because action speaks louder than words, and
Exactly.
there are many individuals, as Clever mentioned, 700 people on a WhatsApp group as well,
Mm-hmm.
but also in terms of the government and lobbying government to play a more active role. Yusuf, is there?
Mm-hmm.
I know you the name Ronnie Kestrel's
Yes.
ex-minister. His name has been
Mhm.
mentioned, but in terms of government itself, is anything being done to lobby government?
Yes, there is. A lot of the senior old ANC guys are going to government saying, listen, you'll need to support this because these are the people that supported us. However, we all know that it's a lot of money that will change hands. And unfortunately, Cuba is what we call a non-sexy country. They don't have vast amounts of mineral wealth and so on. They export doctors. That's what they do, and they're not sending bullets and bombs. So it's a non-sexy industry, if we call it that. You know, and it's embarrassing to first world countries that a country that's been under embargo for all of these years went from a 90% illiteracy rate to one of the highest literacy rates in the world. It's a miracle. The fact that they went from a complete third world healthcare system to a first world healthcare system, even though they've been under embargo for what, maybe 40 years or more. So these are the miracles that have happened. And it's embarrassing for the US because the richest country in the world couldn't do it. They couldn't provide healthcare for all of their population. Neither could they get the literacy rates that this poor island was able to. It's embarrassing for them. Simple as that.
Well, clearly, but also, Yusuf, let's just talk about the practicality and
So,
also in terms of challenges, because I know
mhm,
you're at the forefront of getting this project off the ground and to
mhm,
make it
mhm.
work and to make sure that the much needed help actually gets to the Cuban people.
Yes. Step one we need to do is we need to get people to fly into Brazil, Sao Paulo. The Brazilians will have medications ready in bags. We need to get it, pick it up, and send it through to Havana, Cuba. So that's the first thing we need. We know that the normal courier services are A, inept, and B, with our current petrol price hikes, take too long and are just too expensive. We're spending more money on courier than actually getting it there. So that's one of the areas that we need to really focus on. If we get money in, we found that the cheapest way for us to get the medication that they require into Cuba is to fly to Brazil, bags packed, grab them, take it across. We obviously don't have any legal restrictions now because we are friends of both the Cuban and Brazilian governments. So that really would help. So I'm encouraging people, please dig deep into your pockets, contribute towards this. You are literally saving lives.
Yes, clever. And I suppose Friends of Cuba Society very much actively in discussion with people like the Brazilian government through the
Mm,
Brazilian ambassador and possibly even through Mexico.
yes,
Yes,
exactly.
yes, definitely. I think Yusuf is right. I mean, so we know that this is a non-governmental initiative that has been started by people who've got passion, who actually realize that the Cubans did quite a lot for us. In fact, Cubans sacrificed their lives for South
Mm,
Africans. They actually sent soldiers to die for us. If you go to the um, memorial walls that are at the Freedom Park, you will see there's more than 2,000 names that are inscribed of Cubans that actually died in Angola fighting against the apartheid government to free
mm,
the Angolans, and at the same time also fighting to free South Africans. So they actually put down their blood. And when they left, there's, like the Cubans say, when they left the country, they never left with any gold or diamonds. They took their dead bodies and they buried them. There is no province in Cuba that does not have a person that has participated in the war in Angola. You will find that from all the 14th province, there is no, in fact, they even say that 90% of the families in Cuba would have somebody that have been sent to Angola and took a mission to fight and to to support the liberation of many countries in Africa, especially in the Southern Africa, which includes Mozambique, South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and all these countries that are here. So I think, like we're saying, let's encourage people to contribute to this initiative by putting money, and then we find ways of economic ways, especially flying people that can take bags of 23 kg. Some flights they allow people to take 2 bags of weight around 23 to 30 kgs. So could you have somebody going there with 60 kgs of medication, which is quite a lot. That we can put in, and it will be much cheaper for us to do that than to use the couriers of DHL, which has got a risk of being confiscated by the United States. So if we have our own people carrying our own medication and we go and deposit it in Cuba, we know that it's going to be safe. And therefore we encourage all South Africans, we encourage the South African government itself to do as they did last time. I know that they initiated about 50 million rands that they wanted to send to Cuba, but because of the right-wing government, right-wing party of the DA, they went to court, and South Africa could not send that type of money to Cuba because people said we have got South Africans that are unemployed. Why are we sending money to Cuba and all this? Cuba is not a democracy and so on. And that process could not go. This was done when Comrade Naledi Pandor was still Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that I think we need to go back again and see how we can encourage our government to do the same thing and contribute to the Cuban cause.
Definitely.
Well, certainly. And also, Yusuf, I think, we're having this discussion tonight on Salam Media, but mainstream media is not having this discussion. Mainstream media is actually silent. And the key issue here is it requires activism as well. It requires noises to be made. It requires protests action to take place. Like we've seen in the case of Sudan as well, where the genocide was unfolding in Sudan as well. Mainstream media was very, very quiet. We know the narrative that mainstream media was talking with regard to Gaza. We know there's a genocide unfolding in Lebanon right now as we speak, in southern Lebanon as well. And now this other genocide as well. And I just find that, there's very little noise that is being made. And I think from an activism perspective as well, I think that needs to be taken to another level, Yusuf.
Definitely. I think the average South African doesn't realize the impact that Cuba actually has on us on a day-to-day basis. If you have a domestic worker in a rural area, it's more than likely in that clinic or hospital in the area, there were Cuban doctors that trained our local doctors to look after them. And those doctors then come into government in Durban, King Edward. And when you get sick and you don't have medical aid and you go there, the care that you're receiving was actually taught by the Cuban guys, the practical side, So it directly impacts on us, on every South African that's out there. We need to take that into account.
Certainly, and I see time obviously is up. Clever, I'm going to ask you to have the final words, just from final thoughts.
Thank you very much. I think we would want to say to all South Africans, Cuba is our friend. Cuba does not owe us anything. We actually owe Cuba a lot. They sacrificed their lives in liberating us, Southern Africa, including South Africa. They also, after that, trained more than 3,000 of our doctors that are most of them now working in our hospitals. They are still continuing, even in this hardship. They haven't sent our doctors back home. They are still training them. So let's do our part and contribute and make sure that the Cubans can come out of this situation. They are not stifled. They are not brought down by this terrorist, fascist regime of Donald Trump and the United States.
Well, thank you for that, Clever Banganayi, Deputy Secretary General, Friends of Cuba Society, and also to Yusuf Kadwa, Palestine BDS as well. We thank both of you. We do appreciate you taking time out. We have opened up the discussion, and it's a discussion that we still need to take further as well. But I think more importantly, it is action. action will speak louder than words. It is about digging deep into our pockets. It's about people coming together, and more importantly, to show our appreciation and our gratitude to the people of Cuba who supported us in our time of need and who still continue supporting us as well.
Yes.
And this is something that we certainly need to have uppermost in our mind. But for now, we thank both of you. All the best to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for your
very
time.
much.
Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Yusuf Kadwa and Clever Banganayi with us, yes, and this is a discussion that, as I said, is not taking place in many parts around the world. It's not taking place in South Africa as well, and particularly when it comes to recognizing the contribution of Cuba to South Africa, and particularly to our healthcare sector. And many of us know it, that many Cuban doctors are in South Africa serving our very own communities. And it is time that we also took notice and we paid attention to their plight right now. Just listening to one of the students talking about people dying already because they can't get the necessary treatment, because there is a shortage of fuel, the electricity is a problem, and before we know what's happening, there is going to be food shortages as well. So it's something we as a nation, we need to be aware of, and hopefully after having started this conversation, we will definitely will be able to pursue and see what the government, trade union, civil society, and I think it requires a joint effort by each and every one to do something with another genocide and another crisis and disaster looming. And with those few words, I'm going to be taking leave of you. It's been once again an absolute pleasure being in the company of our viewers and our listeners at Salam Media. So from myself and the team right now, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.